Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome from Amsterdam to this first webinar of Project AWeSome. It's so great to see the names of so many people we know. We have of course invited all our colleagues and friends to this webinar, but we have also invited scholars whose work we admire and who we cite all the time in our papers. And we are so happy to have you all with us. We see that more participants are joining in. Welcome to those of you who have just joining us. It's great to have you all with us. In the past 2 years, we have been working on a novel, person-specific approach to investigate media effects. Such an approach is also called a N-is-1 approach or an idiographic approach. Our person-specific approach allows us to investigate how the effects of social media use differs for each single adolescent. And as you will soon see, we found striking person-specific susceptibilities to the effects of social media use. For me, personally, employing this novel approach feels like a milestone in my career. I've been studying the effects of media on children, adolescents, and adults for over 30 years. And during these years, I've seen many examples of strong media effects. For example, I've seen that some children and adults can get enduring fears and nightmares from a scary film, but others can watch the same film without any discernible reaction. But despite these convincing anecdotal examples of strong media effects, in most of our studies we kept finding rather small media effects. And to solve this discrepancy, we developed the differential susceptibility to media effects model about 10 years ago. But until recently, we were only able to investigate differential susceptibility among subsamples based on moderating variables such as age, gender, or loneliness. But unfortunately, such a group-level moderation approach still often leads to disappointing results, probably because it too easily glosses over more subtle individual differences in susceptibilities to the effects of social media. And now we have the tools and theories to investigate the effects of media use on each individual media users. And in the past years, during the pandemic, we, Team AWeSome, together managed to use these tools. And now that the first results are in, we all feel a strong urge to share these results with you and to offer you a glimpse of the theory and methodology behind person-specific media effects. But before we start, we need to share some practical notes. So therefore, I will turn the screen over to Irene van Driel. Irene is one of the AWeSome team members, and today she acts as our moderator.
Hi, thank you so much, Patti. Hello to all of you around the world watching with us today. Welcome to these 3 presentations and followed by discussion by Candice Odgers. Just a few practical notes from my side. After the discussion, which we will have around 5:45, we will have a Q&A session. And there we would like to answer as many questions from you as we can. For that, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of this screen. And you can do that throughout the entire webinar. We will collect the questions. And please indicate with your question your name, your affiliation, for whom the question is intended, and let us know if you want to ask this on screen or off screen, because if you like to ask it on screen, we would like to invite you on this side of the Zoom lane and make you a panelist for a little bit. Any questions we are not able to address live, we will answer in the Q&A chat box or on our website later on within the next few days. So for now, I would say please enjoy and ask away. Have fun.
Okay, thank you, Irene. On to the presenters of today. I'm going to introduce the 3 speakers when they start their presentations. For now, I'd like to extend a very special welcome to Professor Candice Odgers, who kindly agreed to act as a discussant today. It's exciting to have you with us, Candice, if only virtually. On to the first presentation. Our first presenter is Loes Keijsers. Loes is a developmental psychologist and a professor at Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the second largest city in the Netherlands. And Loes is also a member of Team AWeSome. Loes is our methodological expert. Loes, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Patti, for giving me the screen. Welcome everyone to this awesome webinar. The webinar of Project AWeSome, of course. Before Irene already explained to you that you can ask questions to us, but please allow me also to start with asking you a question. Who of you feels like they are exactly the average person? Do you yourself feel that you are the average world citizen? Maybe one of you, 175 people now present, feels like they are the average, but typically if I ask this question to audiences, no one really feels like they are the average. And actually, marketeers already know this for a very long time. Because if they develop products for customers, they develop a different product for each customer. So we really feel unique. We really feel that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to our hair, when we want to buy a shampoo. Well, the same actually may be true when it comes to the effect that social media or media use have on our well-being, our self-esteem, our confidence, our happiness in life. One size doesn't fit all. If we look at how media effects are theoretically described, these are effects that occur within individual persons. So if I use my smartphone, it affects me. If you use your smartphone, it affects you. But my smartphone use doesn't affect you, hopefully, nor vice versa. So these processes really occur within individual persons. And as described by Patti beforehand, these effects differ from person to person. The susceptibility to media effects may be heterogeneous across people. However, when we look at the larger field of empirical studies that is used to test these theories, we typically rely on a between-person approach. So for instance, if we want to know how social media affects our well-being, then we take a sample of children in our case, and here I've simplified it to only 3. Let's say these are Peter, Anne, and Victor. So Peter fills out a questionnaire on social media use and well-being, and fills out a questionnaire, and changed the face. And now we have 3 individual people who fill out a questionnaire, and there is an association. And in meta-analytical work, this association typically is quite small. Importantly, in this between-person approach, it answers the question, who has the highest well-being? Those who use social media less or more frequently. But each child here in this graph is one data point. So there's only a single assessment of every individual in this cross-sectional study. Simplified, but the idea is that of each person, there's one data point. However, as we just described before, media effects actually occur within individuals. They don't occur between persons. So what we could also examine is the within-person process if we have repeated assessments of a single person. When we have these repeated assessments, we can assess when does this individual feel better, at moments with more or with less social media use. And by answering this question, we actually answer the question, does social media use predict intra-individual change in well-being? Does this specific child's social media use predict whether this child feels happy or unhappy at the moment? And this within-person approach is the first innovation of Project AWeSome. However, as we're an ambitious group of people, we wanted to take it one step further to really study how these effects may be unique to each individual. Because if we look at this within-person approach, we still have one estimate about the within-person process. By taking it one step further with an NS1 or person-specific approach, we were interested to see how one adolescent's well-being is affected by social media use. For instance, whether this person is negatively affected, this person is unaffected, and this person is positively affected. Each person now has their own correlation, and we can assess these correlations if we have sufficient repeated assessments of one individual over time, say 50 or 100 assessments of a single person. So the key question that Project AWeSome attempts to answer is what this heterogeneity in media effects theories really look like at the individual level. How is one adolescent's well-being affected by social media use? And apart from having a better match between our theoretical work and the empirical studies that we conduct, it also has practical implications if we move from more nomothetic between-person approach to an idiographic approach. After all, if we're all different and we only have one estimate for the whole population at the aggregate level, and we derive general principles from this one estimate at the population level, it may be applicable to some individuals, but not applicable to others. Perhaps it's even opposing to some individuals in the population. So if we want to translate science to practice, we cannot rely only on the study of general principles. Ideally, we provide advices that are really tailored to the individual. But in order to do that, we need to understand how each individual is uniquely affected by social media use. How this person is, for instance, positively affected, this person is negatively affected, and this person is unaffected. Because if we have these NS1 or idiographic insights, that is when we can really translate science to practice. So basically what Project AWeSome entails is two methodological approaches to the study of media effects. They are complementary to each other. We have a nomothetic approach where we have multiple persons for single or few time points. And this approach is really powerful to generalize to populations or to assess longer-term developmental change, as in a longitudinal study. However, we also take a person-specific approach where we have many time points of single persons to really assess what the person-specific mechanisms are. By combining the strengths of two approaches, we can, on the one hand, really say something about the person's specificity of these processes, but also find patterns and generalize it to populations. So we really unify the strengths here. And to do so, we have a measurement burst design among 388 youth with more than 250 assessments of single individuals. First of all adolescents filled out bi-weekly surveys. So every second week they got a short survey, but they also were enrolled in ESM bursts, experience sampling bursts. And I'll explain later what it means. 6 times per day for 3 full weeks, they filled out how they were feeling, what they were doing, and what they were doing online. And in addition to that, we added digital trace data from the Etica app that we use for these experience sampling studies. And we asked adolescents to download their Instagram archives and to donate it to science. I hope you're all quite familiar with a longitudinal approach of repeated assessments among large samples, but it might be that experience sampling is rather new. So I zoom in a bit more on this new method. In experience sampling, adolescents install an app on their own smartphone. And 6 times per day, we ask them, do you feel happy right now? And what are the social media that you've used? And this results in time series data or intensive longitudinal data of single individuals. Per measurement burst, 126 measurements of one single child. And these are the data of one child. And this was done of 388 adolescents. With this huge amount of data, we can now answer the question whether social media affects us all in a similar way, whether people differ, or whether maybe these effects are actually unique to each individual. We can't answer this question by studying the aggregate level alone, although large sample studies really have their own strength. In addition to this, we need a person-specific or idiographic approach. This will help us to really zoom in whether one size fits all, or whether we are all unique persons that are affected by media use in a unique way. Well, this pressing question is the topic of the remaining presentations, where you'll see some of the first empirical results of Project AWeSome. I hope you enjoy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Loes, for this great and thoughtful introduction. Friends and colleagues, it's time to hand you over to the second presenter, Ine Bijens. Ine is an assistant professor in the Amsterdam School of Communication Research, and she's the communication and media effects expert in our team. Ine, the screen is all yours.
Thank you so much, Patti. And thank you to all of you for joining our webinar today. I am very excited to present the findings of the first studies of our project, which focused on the effects of social media use on adolescents' affective well-being and their self-esteem. But before I get to the findings, let me briefly give some background to our studies. When we look at the literature, we see that studies have typically reported mixed findings, yielding either small negative, small positive, or no effects of the time spent using social media on different indicators of well-being. So what's going on here? Well, it is possible that these effects may have been small and non-significant because they result from sizable heterogeneity in adolescent susceptibility to the effects of social media use on well-being. And in fact, earlier studies that investigated associations of social media use with indicators of well-being, including ours, have often reported average effect sizes that yield one effect size for the overall sample. But such average effect size can in fact be considered as an aggregate of numerous individual effect sizes that may range from highly positive to highly negative. So in line with the propositions of media effects theories that each adolescent may have a unique susceptibility to the effects of social media, a viable explanation for these small and inconsistent findings in earlier studies may in fact be that the effect of social media differs from adolescent to adolescent. And of course, as Patti already mentioned, we have been looking at individual differences in the effects of social media and media more generally, for instance, by looking at group level differences, such as differences between boys and girls. But these differences do not catch more subtle differences, and they ignore the fact that not all boys are the same and not all girls are the same. So let me show you how we try to obtain a better understanding of adolescents' unique susceptibility to the effects of social media on their well-being. When looking at the effects of social media on well-being, an important hypothesis in the literature is that passive social media use, such as browsing through your Instagram feed, yields negative effects on well-being. And indeed, we have seen in previous studies and in reviews that passive social media use has indeed a small negative effect on adolescents' well-being and people's well-being more generally. But the question is this conclusion feasible? Can we really conclude that this overall effect applies to the full sample? So does one effect size fit all? Or in other words, how many adolescents are actually affected? And to provide an answer to that question, we really need a person-specific approach. So let me show you what the answer looks like when we employ such an approach. In one of our first studies, we used a person-specific approach to address the question whether the effect of social media on well-being differs across adolescents. And perhaps not surprisingly, as you can already see looking at the title of our publication, the answer is that the effect differs from adolescent to adolescent. And in a few moments, I will show you how many adolescents were affected and how many were not affected. This study builds on experience sampling method data, and in our experience sampling surveys, we assessed adolescent social media use 6 times per day, as Loes already told you, and we asked them to indicate how much time in the past hour they had spent using Instagram, Snapchat, and WhatsApp. So for instance, we asked them how much time they had spent viewing posts or stories of others on Instagram. And in addition to that, we assess adolescents' affective well-being by asking them to indicate how happy they felt at that moment. In this study, we used multi-level modeling, and this allowed us to disentangle the between-person association and within-person association. And we were also able to look at heterogeneity in the within-person associations. So let's first have a look at the between-person association. Looking at the question, which adolescents had the highest level of well-being, we found that those who spent more time browsing on Instagram than their peers did not report significantly higher or lower levels of well-being than their peers. So at the between-person level, the duration of social media use was not associated with well-being. And in fact, here we found the exact same effect size as in the meta-analysis of Huang and colleagues. But let's now have a look at the within-person association. The within-person association helped us to address the question whether adolescents' well-being was higher or lower when they had spent more time using social media. And here we found that at moments when adolescents had used Instagram, the time adolescents spent browsing Instagram was not associated with their well-being. So the within-person association was not significant. And this in fact confirmed the findings of previous studies by, for instance, Coyne and colleagues and Jensen and colleagues. But let's have a look at the person-specific associations. Because if we want to truly understand whether social media benefit or harm adolescents' well-being and how many adolescents actually benefit or suffer from using social media, we really have to unravel these person-specific effects, right? So when looking at the person-specific association, we found wide heterogeneity. While for some adolescents, the association was negative, ranging to a beta of -0.48, there was no association for other adolescents, and a positive association for yet another group of adolescents, with a beta ranging to a positive 0.27. And let me illustrate this heterogeneity. So as I just showed you, the overall association was not significant, but we found that the association differed across adolescents. So let's look at how many adolescents felt happier and how many felt unhappier. Here you can see the association for each single adolescent, here for participants 1 to 7. The red lines represent significant negative associations, green lines are significant positive associations, and gray lines are non-significant associations. And looking at participants 1 to 7, we can see that for 4 of them, there was no association. For 2 participants, there was a positive association, and for 1 participant, there was a negative association. And when we look at the next 7 participants, we see a similar pattern. 4 participants for whom we found no association, 2 participants for whom we found a positive association, and 1 participant for whom we found a negative association. And the same can be seen here. And for these participants, there was no association, same here, and similar patterns can be seen here and here as well. So altogether, if we would have based our conclusion on the overall association, our conclusion would have been that there is no association between the time adolescents spend browsing through Instagram and their affective well-being. And while this is true for most adolescents, in a sense that most adolescents did not feel better or worse when they had spent more time passively using Instagram, we also found that some adolescents felt better and a small group felt worse. So this really illustrates why relying on one within-person association per sample that is assumed to apply to all adolescents can be really problematic, because as you can see, there is substantial heterogeneity, and the average within-person association does certainly not hold for all adolescents. Let me now show you another example that illustrates the importance of a person-specific media effects paradigm. In this study that was in fact just published in Journal of Communication this week, we employed a person-specific media effects approach to investigate the effect of the time adolescents spent using social media on changes in self-esteem. And in this study, we used dynamic structural equation modeling to analyze the almost 35,000 experience sampling assessments. Dynamic structural equation modeling is a modeling technique that combines the strengths of multi-level analysis and structural equation modeling with N-is-1 time series analysis. And such N-is-1 time series analysis really enables researchers to establish the longitudinal associations between social media use and self-esteem within single persons. So in this study, we controlled for self-esteem at a previous measurement occasion. And in that sense, we could investigate changes in self-esteem as a result of social media use. And the multi-level part of the dynamic structural equation modeling approach enabled us to test whether the person-specific effect sizes of social media use on self-esteem differed across adolescents. So that way we could answer the question, for how many adolescents does social media use support their self-esteem, for how many does it harm or hinder their self-esteem, and for how many adolescents does it not affect their self-esteem. I'll show you the findings. Looking first at the between-person association of adolescent social media use with their level of self-esteem, we found that it was significantly negative. So adolescents who spent more time with social media reported a lower level of self-esteem compared to adolescents who spent less time with social media. At the within-person level, we found that there was no significant effect of social media use on self-esteem. So on average, participants' self-esteem did not increase or decrease as a result of their social media use in the hour before. But just as in our affective well-being study, we found that the effect of social media use on changes in self-esteem differed from adolescent to adolescent. And let me show you the range of effect sizes for this effect, the effect of social media use on changes in self-esteem. I already told you that the mean of all the person-specific effects, so the average effect, the vertical black line on this graph, was very small and not significant. So on average, adolescent self-esteem did not increase or decrease as a result of their social media use. And as the bar graph shows, this average effect applied to most participants. So the majority of participants experienced no or very small positive or negative effects of their social media use on changes in self-esteem. So the average effect, which was nearly zero, applies to most participants. But the effects varied widely across participants, as I just told you, and they range from a beta of -0.21 to a beta of 0.17 across participants. And you can see that 1 in 5 participants experienced negative effects of social media use on changes in self-esteem. And some adolescents even experienced positive effects. So in fact, 16% of the participants felt more satisfied about themselves when they had spent more time using social media. Now, as I just told you, we use dynamic structural equation modeling, which builds on N is 1 time series analyses. And here you can see an example of a time series for an adolescent who experienced a positive effect. Measurement moments are displayed on the x-axis, and the time spent using social media is represented by the blue line, ranging from 0 to 60 minutes, and the gold line represents adolescent self-esteem, ranging from 0, which reflects feeling not satisfied at all, to 6, which reflects feeling completely satisfied. You can see that this adolescent self-esteem regularly co-fluctuated with the time that he or she spent using social media. So for instance, here you can see that when the social media use of this participant increased, his or her self-esteem increased as well. So this adolescent felt more satisfied. And here you can see that when social media use decreased, self-esteem dropped. So looking at this time series, in fact, you can see that social media use and self-esteem are sometimes very overlapping on this time series plot. However, you can also see that this adolescent sometimes experienced effects in the opposite direction. So sometimes he or she did not become more satisfied about him or herself when having spent more time using social media, but sometimes this adolescence also felt less satisfied, for instance, around this measurement moment. So while most of the time this adolescence feels more satisfied about his or herself when spending more time using social media, she or he sometimes also felt less satisfied. And that brings me to the conclusion of my talk. So looking at the findings of both our well-being and self-esteem study, we found that most adolescents are insusceptible to the effects of social media. And this likely explains why the average effect in both studies was nearly 0. So in other words, the large group of very small person-specific effects likely resulted in an average null effect. And that brings me back to the beginning of this talk, in which I addressed the fact that studies investigating the effects of social media on well-being have found no effects or small negative or small positive effects. And our findings suggest that the effects may be weak because they were diluted across a heterogeneous sample of adolescents with different susceptibilities. And the effects that were reported in earlier studies may have been inconsistent, perhaps because these studies may have slightly oversampled negative susceptibles and oversampled positive susceptibles. And I think that a person-specific approach really makes it possible to discover whether that is really the case. Now, while we found that on average, social media use does not appear to benefit or harm adolescents' well-being and self-esteem, our person-specific approach showed that the average effect does not hold for every adolescent. And in our scientific reports article, we found that the average effect of well-being was true for 74% of adolescents. And in our GOC publication, we found that 63% experienced no or very small effects on self-esteem. And although the average effect applies to most adolescents, concluding that social media do not affect adolescents based on the overall effect would in fact be a wrong conclusion, and it would ignore more than 1 in 4 adolescents. So we found that almost 10% of adolescents felt less happy when they had been browsing through Instagram posts of others. So this means that the hypothesis that has been put forward in literature that passive social media use undermines adolescents' well-being was confirmed for 1 in 10 adolescents. But we also found that almost 20% of adolescents experienced an opposite effect than what we would theoretically expect. So in a sense that they felt happier when spending more time browsing through Instagram. So in other words, the person-specific media effects paradigm illustrates that the effects of social media use on adolescents are small when looked at in aggregate, but when you really start to unravel them, you see that social media use yields different impacts on well-being for different adolescents. And with that conclusion, I would like to end my talk and thank you again for joining us and give the mic back to Patti.
Thank you so much, Ine, for this excellent presentation. Over to our final presenter of today, Loes Pauwels. Loes is a developmental psychologist specialized in methodology, and she has been a postdoctoral researcher in our team for almost 3 years. Loes is our second Loes and our second methodological genius in our team. Loes, I now hand the screen over to you.
Thank you, Patti. I'm going to present the findings of a recent study that I conducted on social media use and friendship closeness in adolescents' daily lives. And today's adolescents depend more than ever on social media to connect with their peers. And ever since the introduction of social media, researchers have therefore started to investigate how social media use is related to friendship closeness. And in general, both empirical studies and reviews seem to be in line with the stimulation hypothesis, which proposes that social media use stimulates friendship closeness in adolescents' daily lives. This idea is also confirmed by adolescents themselves, as a recent study shows that adolescents themselves believe that social media helps them to connect to their friends' lives and to their friends' feelings. An open question is what are the real-time processes that may underlie the development of friendship closeness? And this question may be particularly important with regard to social media use, as social media provide adolescents ample of opportunities to use social media regardless of whether they're at home, school, or at a sports club. And social media even prompt adolescents to share their experiences with friends. For example, Facebook prompts adolescents to share what's on their current minds. Instagram asks to share current thoughts and feelings with friends. And Snapchat expertly prompt to share in-the-moment experiences with peers. So never before have adolescents had so many opportunities to share in-the-moment experiences with their friends. And never before they've had so many opportunities to receive positive feedback and support from their friends. This brings us to the question, how are social media use and friendship closeness related to each other in adolescents' daily lives? And we therefore investigated the stimulation hypothesis from 2 different perspectives. First, from a between-person perspective, we were wondering which adolescents feel closest to their friends. And based on previous study, we expected that this will be the frequent social media users. However, we extended previous studies by also investigating the stimulation hypothesis from a within-person perspective. And we asked, when do adolescents feel closer to their friends? And based on the stimulation hypothesis, we expected that they would feel closer after using social media. We investigated this hypothesis in a recent study that has been published in Developmental Psychology quite recently. It is based on our experience sampling study. And what we ask at each assessment is how whether adolescents have been in touch with their close friends, and if so, whether they have been in touch via Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat, face-to-face, or in another way. And in this presentation, I will specifically zoom in on the findings with regard to Instagram use with friends. And second, we also asked adolescents at each assessment how close to their friends they felt right now. And this is what we found. So first, we examined the between-person association by investigating which adolescents feel closest to their friends. And as you can see here, we found a positive effect of Instagram use with friends, friendship closeness. That is, adolescents who spend more time or use Instagram more frequently experience higher levels of friendship closeness than adolescents who use Instagram with friends less frequently. So if we come back to the stimulation hypothesis, we can say that at first sight, the stimulation hypothesis seemed to be supported. However, to really get some support from this hypothesis, it's also important that we investigate when do adolescents feel closest to their friends. And surprisingly, we found an opposite pattern when we look at this within-person question. That is, we found a very small negative within-person association of Instagram use with friendship closeness. And this means that adolescents felt more but less close after using Instagram in the previous hour compared to not having used Instagram. So it should be noted that the size of this within-person effect was quite small. And therefore we were wondering whether this may be due to some heterogeneity around this effect. So whether this effect may differ from adolescent to adolescent. And indeed, again, we found that one effect size doesn't fit all. In fact, there was quite a large range in the sizes of this association, ranging from -0.75 to +70. So for some adolescents, there was a strong negative association of Instagram use with friendship closeness. For others, there was a strong positive association, and there was a small group, and there was a group of adolescents for which there was no association. So the answer to the question, when do adolescents feel closest to their friends, we can really say that it differs from adolescent to adolescent. And when we look at the percentages, almost a quarter experienced a positive association, 36% a negative association, and about 40% had no association. So to come back to the stimulation hypothesis, which were the central question of this study, if we examine those from between-person adolescents and look at which adolescents feel closest to their friends, we indeed found that these are the frequent Instagram users. However, as within-person associations aren't the same as between-person association, and it differs from adolescent to adolescent, we can actually only say that the stimulation hypothesis is supported for 25% of the adolescents, and for the other adolescents, it wasn't supported or even found an effect in the opposite direction. So now I want to take one step back and to reflect a bit more on the findings that we've presented in the different studies. So the findings that Ine presented with regard to well-being and self-esteem, and the findings that I presented with regard to friendship closeness. And in general, we found striking individual differences in the effect of social media use on psychosocial functioning. And this brings us to 3 questions for future research that are very closely related. So who are these adolescents who are affected, when, and why? First, we should examine who are affected in order to be able to give personalized advice. And I'm happy to have the honor to already share a very short, very first glimpse of the answer to the question, who experienced these effects? As in general, across our studies, we found that those adolescents with the lowest levels of trait psychosocial functioning, so the lonely adolescents, adolescents with low levels of well-being or self-esteem, experience in general stronger positive effects than adolescents with higher level of trait psychosocial functioning. But we're currently further investigating this question, and we hope to tell you more about this in one of our next webinar. We should also investigate the question, when do adolescents experience social media-induced psychosocial functioning? Because at some moments they may experience, for example, misunderstandings or conflicts, whereas at other moments they may experience may get feedback or positive feedback or social support from their friends. And to get insight in these questions, the when question, we ask adolescents to download and share their Instagram archive with us so that we can get insight in the valence of the social media experiences. And finally, the why question is important to develop novel media effect theories to explain such person-specific effects. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about these questions later on during the Q&A, but now I first hand the screen back to Patti.
Thank you so much, Loes, for another excellent presentation. Dear friends and colleagues, it's now time to listen to our discussant, Professor Candice Oshers. Candice is a developmental psychologist interested in the effect of environmental influences on adolescent mental health. Candice is a professor at the University of California, Irvine and Duke University. We seduced Candice for the role of discussant, firstly, because she has published several important review studies on social media use and adolescent mental health. But she's also one of the proponents of a person-specific approach to social media effects. In her 2020 review in GCPP, Candice and her co-authors concluded that it's time to move beyond estimating one parameter to describe associations between social media use and well-being. And of course, we hope that many colleagues will follow up on this call. Candice, we turn the screen to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Patti, and thank you for having me and for this wonderful set of presentations. I understand now why it's called Project AWeSome. This represents an incredible investment of kind of time and skill and analytic power. So congratulations to you all on pulling this together and distilling it so clearly to us. You know, we could talk all day about this, but I'm going to talk very quickly about it and then pose a question. And I want to focus my comments on kind of 3 main sets of areas. 1 is the finding, 2 is the frustrations in the field, and 3 is the future. So first, with respect to the findings, you know, the fit between theory and method in terms of what Patti and others have talked about in terms of heterogeneity effect and the need to move past this one-size-fits-all approach was really beautifully illustrated in the fit between the theory and the actual data collected in these studies. As a former student of John Nestelrode, he used to talk about this match between theory and method as being a dance. And I think it's exciting for the field. We're finally at the place where our methods are able to kind of match our complex theories of human development. And this is exciting, right? He also had a saying, which was, the mean simultaneously represents everyone and no one. And I think we saw this illustrated time and time again. I think for the findings, I'd push on 2 main points, and these are things that I push on our own team as we collect our ESM data. The first is, it's wonderful that we've identified potential differential susceptibility and identified individual children as maybe falling within those bins. You know, the next step, of course, is to think about how that plays out over time, you know, as Patti has talked about, and over specific developmental periods. You know, we're thinking a lot about the early adolescent period as maybe being a time where we track adolescents, we might see a heightened susceptibility at the population level more generally. And then the second issue is this issue of media effects, in terms of thinking about, we're collecting this intensive longitudinal data, this beautiful kind of, Ina, you demonstrated in your dynamic structural model, how you're controlling even across observations in time for increases, but we're still in this observational data collection mode. So what's the next step to kind of either instrument or to induce some kind of exogenous shock so that we can really talk about effects and get this directionality sorted out where we need it? Second is the frustrations in the field. This is a beautiful study, but I know that it took you a lot of effort to pull up. I know because we've done similar things. And how do we take this to scale? How do we get the population sample sizes that, these embedded measurement bursts that they have with adults? Conducting research with adolescents is hard, right? We know from Kathy Modecki did this wonderful kind of illustration in her introduction to a recent special issue, where she looked at, this was ambulatory assessment research. And in general psychology, it has taken off since 2012. For adolescents, it's plateaued. Now, why is that, right? It's hard to consent adolescents. We need parental consent. Most people will scrape data from 18 and above. What does it mean for our data donation studies? How can we make sure that adolescents are a priority and put at center stage? We know that they're at one of the highest need groups in terms of mental health services, but we know from our reviews of the digital mental health literature, they're often left out of the design. So what can we do as a field to make sure that these kinds of studies can be scaled up to include even larger samples of adolescents and ensure that they're not left behind in the design of research and eventually the design of just-in-time interventions? And then the third comment was really about kind of the future. What does the future of this work look like? And you've given a wonderful glimpse into that this can be done, this kind of intensive assessment, and there's a lot of talk right now in terms of what's the future of passive and ambulatory assessment. Can we move past these measures of how much time have you spent doing various things to the kind of deep digital phenotyping that we'll need? And I know that many of you are starting to work on and think about to really understand what it is young people are experiencing, seeing, and doing in online spaces. So how do we advance that measurement space in a way that's accessible to groups to embed in their own studies? How can we advance, our ideas about causal inference in this framework? We're doing this with intensive longitudinal data, but how can we take that and ensure that we're getting the directionality right? Of course, I'm looking at Patti here. This has been an issue for decades in media effects research. It's not a new issue, but I think we have some new tools. So I'm excited to think about that. And this is such a methodologically skilled group of individuals, so it was a real pleasure to listen to this. But I would love to hear about kind of what you're thinking in terms of the traditional multi-level modeling, the kind of stuff that we do also. What does machine learning offer, right? How do we move forward in thinking about these models as being complementary or kind of adding on to how we would traditionally approach this in a theory-driven way? So where are the gains there? So I guess I would just close by saying, thank you. This was wonderful. This project is great. I'm glad it's getting out there. And raise a question for the panelists of, from where you sit, having completed this study and conducted this great work, what are the next, advancements as you scan the horizon? What do we need to be thinking about and moving in this field to really advance science and to support young people in the places where they spend most of their time, to be honest now? So thank you.
Thank you so much, Candice, for these kind words. We hope to answer your question, but first, I want to thank you very much for your kind words. Unfortunately, we are not able to offer you a present right now, but we can at least try to give you a proper round of applause. Dear friends and colleagues, let's give Candice a nice round of applause from your home, and then I will take care of the sound.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
It's enough. It's enough. It's enough.
I won't stand.
Okay, guys, it's time for Q&A. It's time for discussion. Questions have been stacking up, so we will pull out a couple of them. Irene, are you ready to read out the first question? And can we bring this questioner on the screen?
Yes, I think we are ready. We've received many questions. I'm gonna ask the first person who has indicated to be willing to ask this through audio. So if Amy Orban is still with us, I'm going to allow you to share your audio. I see you are with us twice, so I'm gonna see if this works.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, I'm on the road, so I hope the connection keeps up. Thank you for the lovely presentations. I guess I was wondering, you know, a lot of this whole, it looks like the first part of the project is about talking about variation between individuals. And my question was, where does that leave us in terms of academic conclusions, but also in terms of translation to public policy? Oftentimes when we talk about variation, we then try to predict, you know, what causes somebody to, for example, show a negative or a positive effect. And that can then help us to understand what sort of supports or translational projects we want to put funding into, for example. So don't you think moderation is important? I guess that's a question to everyone in terms of the introduction to this project. And when do you think we should be applying moderation? When should we not?
Shall I say something briefly? So I think indeed it is important both to understand differences between people as well as specific processes. And moderation could be one approach to assess who benefits from social media and who doesn't. However, more and more studies also show that if you apply moderation analyses at the aggregate level, that you derive conclusions that still do not apply to the individuals in the subgroups. So I think one should be careful with suggesting that moderation analyses will actually lead to valid insight regarding processes within individuals. And then when it comes to where's the balance between trying to find these nomothetic principles or general principles versus idiographic or person-specific processes, I'm really inspired by clinical psychology, where they apply NS1 methods also in clinical practice to assess per individual person what their own causal networks are of functioning. And they provide personalized feedbacks based on the person's own person-specific profiles too, and that actually in RCT studies seems to really improve their well-being. So I think we should really keep the best of both paradigms. But apply the paradigm only when it matches with our research question.
Great,
Is there a
thank you.
second question? Is there a second question of one of the participants?
Yes, we have many more questions. I am going to read one out of somebody who prefers not to do it on screen. It's from Craig Seawall, doctoral candidate at the University of Pittsburgh. Thanks so much for an awesome presentation. For all or any of the panelists, I'm curious if your person-centered research has given you any insights on the rich get richer versus poor get poorer hypotheses about social media use. For instance, there's some research indicating that those who are vulnerable offline, those with mental illnesses, for example, are more vulnerable to harms online. And I have an idea who could answer this question best, and I think that could be Loes Keijsers.
Yes, thank you, Irene. We are currently investigating the rich get richer and poor get richer or poor get poorer hypothesis. And what we found is that lonely adolescents are more likely to experience positive effects of social media use on friendship closeness than adolescents who are less lonely. But it should be noted that again, we found striking person-specific differences. So although this hypothesis at the aggregate level seemed to suggest that the poor get richer hypothesis is supported in general in most of our studies, we again found that some lonely adolescents feel better, but others also feel worse. So I think it can still be harmful to draw one conclusion about which hypothesis has most support. It really differs for one adolescent to the other. So each of these hypotheses receives some support for small groups.
Is there another question?
Yes, I have another question. This one is from David Bicken from Boston Children's Hospital. Could an explanation focused on varying experiences rather than varying individual susceptibility at least partially account for your findings? For example, if we consider online aggression, we would expect that someone experiencing this would have a negative reaction regardless of who they are, at least to some extent. This would then explain why individual participants had different associations across moments. They were having different experiences. Thus, combining these perspectives provide the strongest approach.
Yes. Can I answer? Okay. Yeah, I think like Candice already mentioned, I think the way to go is to get at the content of what adolescents are watching or doing or posting on their social media. And indeed, when someone encounters aggression on social media, that's very different than positive content. So I think to really understand where this differential susceptibility comes from, we can of course look at traits, personality traits, but we should also look at the content. Maybe the content is different. Maybe some people look at more idealized content or more negative content, while others, other adolescents encounter more positive content. And also maybe really their responses differ. Maybe the same content elicits different responses. Maybe some adolescents become envious when they watch a certain post, but maybe others get inspired and therefore their well-being might also benefit from watching that post, for instance. So I think, I really think that responses might be different, but also the content really matters. And I think that's really the way that we should go and that we are trying to look at in our studies. We do have the data donation of the Instagram, of the Instagram user accounts of adolescents, and we really want to get at that content because as a question that was asked, it really comes to that. So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Ine. Dear friends and colleagues, I think we have arrived at the end of our webinar. Candice, once again, many thanks for your thoughtful discussion, and many thanks to our colleagues Irene, Ine, and our audiovisual assistant Wieneke, and last but not least, the two Loeses. As announced, the video of this webinar will go up online in the next couple of days. You can also follow us on Twitter. We are strong proponents of open science, and so you can find all our preprints and publications on our website. And Irene will also share its address in the chat. Our next webinar is planned at the end of April. In this next webinar, we plan to offer you more insight in who, when, and why adolescents differ in their susceptibility to social media use. And we will also offer some additional insight on how to successfully design an experience sampling study focusing on social media use. Thank you, friends and colleagues, for joining us. We are hopeful to see you all back in our spring seminar. Rest me to say so long, adieu, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye.